Would be helpful if I turn my mic on. It is 9 a.m. and I call the State Board of Education meeting to order. Casey Griffin on our staff will call the roll to establish a quorum.
Mr. Cobbins.
Here.
Mr. Darnell.
Here.
Mr. Eby.
Here.
Mr. Holt.
Here.
Dr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Here.
Mr. Morrow.
Here.
Mr. Wells. Madam Chairman.
Here,
Madam Chairman, you have 8 voting members.
we have a
Present.
quorum and we are duly convened, and without objection, Mr. Warren Wells is excused. Before I call on Dr. Morrison to provide an update from yesterday's board meeting workshop, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Bob Smith, who is Interim Executive Director for THEC. Welcome. We're pleased to have you joining us. Now I turn it over to Dr. Morrison for the board meeting workshop update. Dr. Morrison?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. As usual, on a workshop day, we had a very full afternoon. We were honored to be joined by the Teacher Advisory Council that the department facilitates, and I'm so happy to see so many of you with us this morning again. Had some great conversation with them at the end of the day. Prior to that, though, we had a number of presentations made by both board staff and department staff on all kinds of issues, ranging from licensure and some of the items up today around ways that we're thinking about trying to make more flexible pathways for teachers and educators who are becoming licensed in Tennessee. We talked about ways that you can earn additional endorsements as well on those licenses through some pathways that the department is proposing. We talked about charter authorizer evaluations, which is still a relatively new body of work for the state board. Puts us in a place of evaluating authorizers against national and state best practices. I heard from Allie Reed on that from our staff. We had an update from Dr. David Laird from the department on the ESSA plan amendments that are being proposed to the federal government here in the next month. And we also heard from Charlie Buffalino at the department on an update to some of the Teasa rules, some of which are coming to the board today. So it was a full day. We are ready, I think, and turn it back over to you, Madam Chair, for another full day today.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. Our first official agenda item is to approve the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Mr. Darnell provides the motion and Mr. Eby provides the second. This requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells. Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
Thank you. The ayes have it and the motion is approved. The next agenda item is report items. These items will not require a board vote. And the first one I'm going to start with is the Lenore City Day in the District, Mr. Jordan Mullenhour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had an excellent time, a surprisingly large turnout. We visited multiple campuses. We had representatives both from both local elected officials as well as some business executives, and then, of course, many members of the staff. And, of course, the most fun was the students themselves. We talked a lot about a broad range of policies. We got to see some of the science projects that they've been working on, and we also got to witness some of the very acute and just incredibly insightful one-on-one time, some of the tutoring time that we've been talking about in the over the last number of months, and talking with some of the teachers about just how effective they've seen that with the individual students that we got to see. So it was a wonderful time. It was very informative. I would say that it's a reminder to me of just how important it is for each of us to get out and in front of the kids themselves, and then also, and I think most importantly, the teachers who are interfacing with them each day. Thank you.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you so much. You have the next update, which is the CTE and Workforce Development Study Committee.
Yes, so the department has been very diligent in coordinating a very robust conversation around a number of CTE-related items. So I'll say that first. I've really appreciated their engagement and involvement on that front. We did have a meeting and a Zoom call, and during that call, we tried to discuss in particular some of the occupational pathways. If you recall, at our last meeting, we put forth some changes that would allow members of industry to participate in the classroom and to more easily engage with students directly. So we talked a little bit about that. And then, of course, there was conversation around Teasa and how we might, a brief conversation about how we might look forward and take into account the Teasa framework and better tailor it to aligning CTE investments with the marketplace. So it was a great conversation. I think the highlight, though, for me is that the department, I know, is still looking at and evaluating changes to the Teasa rules, and in my mind, that's really where the focus of our time will be in the next committee session. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. The Literacy Study Committee update by Mr. Nate Morrow, the chair of that committee, study committee.
Thank you. Briefly, had a great meeting. Again, loving to get best practices in from other school districts, and got to do that. And then one of our focuses was just really looking on how we're continuing to recover learning loss over the summer camp programs. We got some breakdowns on some of our attendance rates from the summer programs, and just happy to report, you know, as we sort of broke it down into, you know, how many students were there between 10 and 25%, 26 and 50, 51, 75. And the bulk of students were kind of in that group 3. You know, number of children by attendance percentage was around 12,000, which is around, you know, we're looking at, that was 51 to 75%, and then greater than 75% was around 64,000. So you're looking at a high percentage of them being there really half to 2/3 of the time, which is really exciting to see. And it was just an encouragement to see the gains. I think, again, going from the fears we had initially of the learning loss and looking at how different districts have really come together to see this recovery happen and the work that a lot of teachers are doing. And, you know, we've all done our trips over the summer to see students doing it, and then to get the reports back on it to see the growth has been great.
Excellent, thank you very much. I do want to point out something I should have said in the beginning, especially for those of you who are joining us for the first time. The board does have several study committees that are chaired individually by different board members, and this is incredibly important work for the board and helps us to dig deeper into every subject matter that the study committees exist for. So I'm thankful for the 2 leaders who just presented today. I do have a couple of updates because I also had a day in the district in White County, and I do want to thank Mr. Nathan James and Ms. Allie Reed for planning that event with the Director of Schools, Mr. Kurt Drawnbarger. And just like Mr. Mollenauer described, the day is so important, and the crowd was quite large, and they really rolled out the red carpet. We did have panel discussions with students, teachers, administrators, and then local communitarians that involved the county commission, the county mayor, and other people from different walks of life, if you will, their own board, their local board. But the student panel was certainly the most engaging and the most interesting to be a part of. They were the least intimidated, and that was a sight to behold. They were not sparing anything that they wanted to say, because they were all told by the director, including the teachers and administrators, I want you to tell the truth. I want you to tell the unvarnished truth and make sure that, you know, it's not going to offend me, and I want the board to know. I want Chair Hartgrove to understand this. So that was the highlight. And interestingly enough, the teachers were a little bit less inclined to share. But what they did share, I made notes and I shared that with our team. Some of the things were directed toward the local school district, and the director was taking notes. So I think it was just as valuable for him as it was for me as a board member. And we were lucky to have several members of our staff to join us for that day. So it was a great day. My next update, and I'll try to be brief, sometimes it's hard, but we had our Ed Preparation and Licensure Study Committee that I chair, and we had that meeting in November, and we had some excellent presentations as well. And I don't want to sell anybody short, but I always appreciate the reports that come from the department to help ground us in the work of licensure. And it's been an evolution and a lot of work that has taken place to make sure that we're addressing licensure in the proper manner, as well as looking at EPPs and make sure that we produce are indeed meaningful for them, as well as leading to change that needs to take place. The meeting actually ended with TACTI joining us, which is the Organization of Colleges of Education, I believe that's the proper title, joining us, and they were engaging in the conversation, in particular around EdTPA, which we will be voting on some of those changes today. So it was important to hear from them, and they join us every time we meet. So that's my report. Thank you. Let's move into action items on first reading. The first item is item A, approved high school policy 3.205. The reminder again, I know you all have this down pat, but for the record, please state your name and title for the record. Thank you.
Good morning, Deborah Knoll, Assistant Commissioner of CCTE. The approved high school course policy 3.205 identifies courses that have been approved by the State Board for Instruction in Tennessee schools. The item updates the approved high school course policy to ensure accuracy of the current course offerings. The department conducted a review of the courses listed in the policy and added several courses to the policy that currently exists in the course code management system. Several of the courses added to the policy included courses that are part of the Career and Technical Education Program of Study. Likewise, the courses removed from the list were previously retired and no longer part of the CTE Program of Study. These course changes were approved by the State Board of Education at previous meetings, but had not been reflected in the approved high school course policy. Additionally, this item lists the courses that may be counted toward the new computer science graduation requirement, beginning with the 9th graders in the 24-25 year. The Department of Education recommends acceptance of this item on first reading, and the State Board staff concurs with this recommendation. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Eby?
Thank you. First, very impressive list of courses. Excuse me. I noticed categories 9 and 18 both list JROTC. One's under military science and one's under government public administration. I assume one is for CTE and one's not. Are the courses the same or are they different? Or?
The courses are the same. It just reflects that the content that is contained within that JROTC could be for the general education student as well as a CTE student. It fits really well with our core standards and our career clusters in that regards. One thing to note, though, it is a G course, meaning we don't label it as a CTE course, and this is specifically due to the Perkins funding. So these courses are funded by the Department of Defense, and they cover costs such as instructors, the cadets' uniforms, educational costs, things like that. Also, the 25 CTE classroom cap also limits the JRTC classes and does not fall within the lines of the Department of Defense that is outlined as requirements for those courses. So we've labeled them as a G, but we just want those identified that they fall really well and they fall in line with that career cluster for CTE as well.
Thank you. And then the removal of courses, is that because there was, people don't take them anymore, or how's the decision made to remove a course?
Yeah, for the CTE courses that were removed, we do a 3-year cycle where we review to make sure that they're relevant, both in rigor and in content. If we find that there are no students that are enrolled or that course is not relevant anymore or needs to be updated, that's when those courses are removed.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Cobbins.
Is there a way for real estate to be added to the list?
There's always a way for courses to be added to the list. We will, we're on a 3-year cycle. We look at trends that are happening. We listen to our advisory councils. If that is brought to light as, an emerging career, something that shows, huge growth in our state, then that is always something that we take into account when we're adding either new courses or new programs of study.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Morrow provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay or no? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you. And you have the next item.
I do. The Tennessee State Board of Education Educator Licensure Policy 5.502 details the requirements for issuance, renewal, advancement, and reactivation of all license types. This item proposes revisions to the policy necessary to implement the Tennessee Department of Education's Computer Science Endorsement Pathway, pursuant to Chapter 979 in Public Acts of 22. PC 979 requires the department to develop and submit to the State Board of Education a no-cost pathway to the Computer Science K-12 endorsement. This item amends the endorsement section of the Educator Licensure Policy 5.502, detailing the requirements for the educator to receive a computer science endorsement through the department's pathway. The department's computer science endorsement pathway contains 6 self-paced modules that allow teachers to demonstrate their knowledge and skills of the computer science standards by embedding these practices into their current instruction. To obtain the endorsement, the educators must meet all requirements, hold a valid Tennessee practitioner or professional license, complete required modules, be recommended by the department, and submit a qualifying scores on the Computer Science Endorsement Pathway final assessment. The department plans to publish passage rates on the CSEP final assessment. The Department of Education recommends acceptance of this item on first reading, and the State Board staff concurs with this recommendation.
Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Eby.
This is more a general comment on alternative pathways. How do we ensure the rigor when a person gets licensed by one of these alternative pathways as compared to the traditional pathway? Do we have any kind of tracking mechanism or evaluation of that?
I know in the case of this pathway, we ensured rigor when we looked at the existing praxis test, and we, cross-referenced that as noted yesterday, as well as talked with industry, talked with post-secondary and our secondary teachers to ensure that we didn't have any gaps within this assessment. As, we go through the pilot, as we, have educators go through this, we're going to be continuously, making note of any changes that need to be done or many updates in lines with the rigor to ensure that students are well prepared in this area.
And then do we track evaluations or something on how a teacher has done and compare this teacher got their license this way versus a teacher got their license that way?
That is a great recommendation. It's something that we can do moving forward as teachers earn this pathway. I think that is a great recommendation that we can absolutely keep track of.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Morrow.
Just for clarification, so it's 80% is what the score is for the pass rate on the alternate pathway?
That is correct.
And then did we come up with that score? I know we talked about some yesterday, but did we come up with that score and how that correlates with what a passing of the praxis would be? Like, is there a sort of correlative nature to that 80% that aligns with what a passing score on the praxis would be?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Jensen provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. Do you have another one?
I have one more.
You do? One more, okay. Please proceed.
Okay.
Item C.
This item creates a new policy titled Graduation Substitutions Policy 3.103. Due to the passage of recent legislation requiring certain courses to count as graduation credit substitutions, it was determined that the creation of a new policy listing all courses that may serve as graduation credit substitutions was necessary. The list of graduation substitutions has previously been contained in the department guidance. The creation of this policy will ensure transparency and consistency across the state regarding graduation substitutions and will ensure public notice regarding any changes to courses approved for graduation credit requirement or substitutions. Chapter 946 of the Public Acts of 2022 requires that the State Board of Education to develop an Industry 4.0 diploma distinction for high school students interested in pursuing a career of a high-need, high-skill industry after graduation. PC 946 also allows a student pursuing a distinction to earn at least one science credit and at least one math graduation credit through work-based learning courses, dual enrollment courses, or other course substitutions approved by the state board. This policy includes a list of work-based learning courses that students pursuing the Industry 4.0 distinction can use as substitution for their third-year credit of science or fourth-year credit of math. Additionally, in accordance with Chapter 979 of the Public Acts of 2022, revisions to the graduation requirements, Rule 0520-01-03.06, approved by the State Board in the October 20, 2022 quarterly meeting, allows students to substitute a computer science course for their third credit of science or fourth credit of math. This policy lists the computer science courses that may serve as substitutions. The Department of Education recommends acceptance of this item on first reading, and the State Board staff concurs with this recommendation.
Thank you. I do want to point out and thank Robin Ye in particular for addressing some that were inadvertently left off the list, and so thank you so much for that. But it's also a reminder to others and our constituents that if they discover that something else is omitted, we do need to check it to make sure that it was just accidental or if it was really a planned removal. So thank you so much for that. Other questions or comments?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Holt.
So then this may have just been addressed, but I received an email from a constituent listing, it's about 12 or 13 courses that person believed was omitted. And I just wanted to ensure that I know whether those courses were intentionally omitted or if they're being added back on.
Yes, so we are going to take a final look at this, and we can add those courses back on between first and second reading. There was, when we did the red line, I thought there were comments, they were actually omissions, and it just inadvertently got left off. So we will definitely, we've taken note of all of that, and we will definitely correct that between this first and second reading, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Eby?
Just a comment. I'm glad to see that we continue to look at graduation requirements. What's relevant? What do we need? And I challenge this board to continue. And our THEC representative, I'll let you know that I'm an advocate that being an engineer, I believe in math, but do we need to have math every year in high school versus having 4 credits when it provides an opportunity if somebody can take another course that would advance their career? And so I know Victoria Harpool and I have been talking about this. I would like to continue the study about what options that we have for our students to potentially get their 4 credits in math and then be able to take something else during their last year.
Thank you. Other comments? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Dornell provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item is 3D, Authorizer Evaluation Policy. Ms. Allie Reed.
Thank you. Good morning. Allie Reed, Director of Engagement and Accountability for the State Board. On first reading today is our Authorizer Evaluation Policy, which is a companion policy to the evaluation rule that's on first reading next. So this policy further explains what's in rule by detailing evaluation cohorts and timelines, the evidence considered in an evaluation, and the evaluation ratings and corresponding follow-up actions. Additionally, this policy includes the evaluation rubric as Appendix A. So So upon completion of the State Board's first full evaluation cycle over the last 2 years, the State Board staff reviewed this policy for opportunities to further clarify and strengthen our process. So the most significant changes really occur in the appendix, and those mirror the changes that are made to State Board Policy 6.111, which is also on first reading in a moment. Any questions on this one?
Questions?
Ellie, I'm sorry, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
yes, Mr. Mullenhour.
Ellie, who all did you involve in sort of the charter school community as you were crafting these, the rubric specifically?
The rubrics, yes. So initially, the rubric, well, it's all based off of our policy, and that was developed in collaboration with a national association of charter school authorizers, as well as all of our authorizers in Tennessee, and then some national consultants in addition. We've also gotten feedback from the Charter Center, engaged with them too on this process, and then representatives from charter schools when we originally were creating it. And so these are adjustments. We've involved very similar groups as we've been making adjustments too.
Okay, thank you. I will mention that I reached out to a couple of charter school operators myself, and I would say they corroborate everything you just said. They looked at it, reviewed it, provided feedback, and they thought that you guys did an excellent job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item? Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second?
Mr. Mullenhour provides a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. You're queued up for the
Thanks.
next one.
Yes. So also on first reading is our evaluation rule, which defines the overall process and the follow-up actions of the State Board based on outcomes. Again, upon completion of our first cycle, we took a look at the rule to determine any necessary changes as well. And so those include a timeline for adding in new authorizers into the cycle, and then additional flexibility regarding the composition of our evaluation teams to ensure conflicts of interest are avoided. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved?
Mr. Mullenhour provides the motion. Second?
Second.
Mr. Morrow provides a second. Any further questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. And you have the next one, item F.
Yes, last one here. The Quality Charter Authorizing Standards Policy 6.111, this contains those essential practices that govern the day-to-day operation of our charter authorizers. And these were developed based on national best practices and state law and originally adopted in 2018. As an agency that's committed to regularly evaluating its work, we're proposing several changes to the standards upon completion of this first full cycle. And having arrived at the proposed changes after these 2 years of evaluations, we also engaged our authorizers in the process through ongoing conversations and an in-person workshop to discuss these changes in particular before bringing these proposed changes to you today. So generally, the changes include a reorganization to group relevant authorizing responsibilities and eliminate duplicative standards, to incorporate the bonus advanced standards into the full set of required standards, to consolidate the standards so that they are achieved through the use of authorizer-created materials and not just through use of state-required materials. Added language to require the key authorizing responsibilities be documented in board-approved policies, and then added a standard for amendment, petition review, and decision-making. So these changes would go into effect ahead of the fall's evaluation once it's after final reading, of course, and will require some flexibility for authorizers being evaluated this year to ensure there's reasonable time to implement any standards that require additional actions because of these changes. So we are aware of that and will be making those considerations before we move into the next round of evaluations. Happy to answer any questions here.
Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Cobbins.
Thank you. Under Standard 2, and I know you're doing a reorganizing and reshuffling of things, so my main question is at the, what is that, end of section 1, is that right? Well, particularly the deletions, under that section at the very end, most specifically, requires applicants to demonstrate capacity to serve students with diverse needs, such as students with disabilities or learning exceptionalities and English learners. Does that reemerge somewhere else, or is that taken into account elsewhere within the standards?
Yep, that is incorporated into a different section. That was one of those that was reorganized, so it's not entirely eliminated.
Okay. If you can point me to that after the meeting, I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
sure.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Holt? Mr. Holt?
So Ally, I just want to thank you for all the great work that you've done in essentially creating, with the work of others as well, but these standards for having a clear system for evaluating authorizers, which I think is just a great thing that we've been charged as a state board to do, and it's going to add a lot of value in ensuring that the authorizers know what the best practices are, and that the public knows, what the authorizers are doing with respect to those best practices. I have a question that we talked about a little bit offline, which is, are there ways in this policy that we can perhaps be maybe a little clearer on who within the authorizers the different categories are kind of going to, whether it's specific and not individuals, but just if it's decision makers with an authorizer, if it's things that like a certain part of the staff would be responsible for, just because as I read through the very detailed work that was done with respect to the ones that we looked at yesterday, I think it could be helpful if we could find maybe a little bit more clarity on who it is that we think may be accountable for, any areas where there could be improvement. So we can continue talking about that, but just wanted to flag that.
Yes, absolutely. The standards do have some areas where we kind of think about it in three different buckets. So you have authorizing staff, leadership, and decision makers who all represent the term authorizer. And so there are some areas where it is explicit in terms of naming that. We also have an additional guidance document that goes into further detail, and that can be expanded there. But certainly can take a look at, are there places in the standards where we can add more of that in and then continue to further define and explain in our additional guidance document too. But it's a great point.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Holt provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is
Thank
approved.
you.
Thank you very much. Moving into action items on final reading. The first item is item A, Computer Science Standards Framework for grades K through 12. Ms. Deborah Knoll.
Good morning, Deborah Knoll, Assistant Commissioner of CCTE. With the passage of Chapter 979 in the Public Acts of 2022 by unanimous vote of the Tennessee General Assembly, the State Board of Education, the Tennessee Department of Education, and all local education agencies and public charter schools are required to take specific actions related to computer science education to ensure that all students are fully prepared for the technological jobs of today and in the future. PC 979 requires the department to recommend academic standards for computer science education to the State Board of Education for adoption. State Board of Education is required to adopt academic standards for computer science education, which must be included in the computer science curriculum for students in grades kindergarten through 12. The standards adopted by State Board of Education must be available for implementation beginning of the 24-25 school year. However, schools are not required to implement the computer science standards until the 24-25 school year. This item includes new computer science framework, which has been created in collaboration with the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network, post-secondary faculty, industry representatives, and K-12 teachers. These new computer science standards replace the current K-8 digital learning computer science standards. Additional feedback was solicited between the first and final reading. The standards framework includes the table of contents, value statement and declaration, research and vision of the standards, breakdown of each of the dimensions, how to read the standards, progression, and vertical alignment, recommended skills for computer literacy, and an overview and list of standards by grade level. There were no changes between the first and final reading. The Department of Education recommends approval of this item on final reading, and the State Board of Education staff concurs with this recommendation.
Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Eby?
I asked this yesterday, but just to get it on record. So since it is K through 12 and we're implementing it all basically in 1 year, what are we doing to somebody who, when it starts out in 7th or 8th grade, feeling frustrated maybe because they haven't had K through 6, or somebody just moves into the area and comes in late to assure catch-up?
That's a great question. So the standards themselves are very foundational in nature. They really allow for teacher to explore those introductory topics such as digital citizenship, basic tasks like identifying algorithms, which all will be required for high school students to have no prior computer science expertise in. However, there are flexibility also built within the standards that allows educators to push their students into deeper learning and application. So there's room for that scaffolding, there's room to go back to that foundational piece, and there's room to push forward for students who are more advanced.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item?
Move for approval?
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Say aye. Sorry.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. You have the next item.
Great, thank you. The Chapter 946 of the Public Acts of 2022 requires the State Board of Education to develop an Industry 4.0 diploma distinction for high school students interested in pursuing a career in high-need, high-skill industry after graduation beginning in the 22-23 school year. PC 946 also revised requirements on how LEAs assign credit to students enrolled in work-based learning courses. Currently, Career and Technical Education Rule 520-01-07.04 states that students may earn a maximum of 3 work-based learning credits per school year. At least 1 credit must be earned through related classroom experience, which must include a minimum of 5 periods per week of classroom instruction. PC 946 revised the requirement for each credit requiring a minimum of 2 periods per week of classroom instruction, as opposed to the minimum of 5 and 1 credit of work-based learning. This item presents revisions to the rule to align with PC 946 to reflect the updated classroom instruction time requirement for work-based learning courses. State Board staff held a rulemaking hearing on January 6, 2023 to collect public feedback. No comments were submitted at the hearing. Minor changes were made between the first and final reading to clarify the amount required of classroom instruction per week for schools operating on a block schedule. The Department of Education recommends approval of this item on final reading, and the State Board staff concurs with this recommendation.
Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Darnell?
Ms. Knoll, just seeking clarification. When we talk about the instruction time, whether it be block or traditional, does that have to be in-person learning, or can that be delivered through a virtual platform?
I don't believe that it clarifies that in the policy.
I know one concern that I had heard from industry, well, CTE through industry, was that if you have a student who is on the job throughout the week, it's difficult to get partners who you can say, all right, well, we're going to do 4, or we're going to do part-time, when those students, it would just be a better fit if they were able to work the whole time throughout the entire week, and then do their schoolwork after work or when they have time to do that through an online platform for that class specifically.
Yes, we're continuing to look at these things, especially with the innovative school model. Trying to think of innovative ways to meet the needs of both the industry and of the student. And so we'll continuously take a look at that. Thank you.
I think also for the record, it's important to recognize one person in particular who did provide a comment, and that's Carol Ketley Burrows, who made the recommendation to include block hours, the block program. So I just want to acknowledge her, and bring attention to the fact that we do listen and you do accept the feedback and take into consideration what is being recommended. So I think it's important to highlight that you brought that to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Angie Sanders.
Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the Board, just to address your question, Nick, I believe that would probably be permissible under the State Board's virtual education rule as a virtual education program. So there is that opportunity for districts to establish a virtual education program where a single course is offered virtually in order to give students access to an expanded course option. So I think it would potentially fall under that to allow that classroom time to be virtual.
Other comments, questions? Is there a motion to approve item 4B, Career and Technical Education Coordinator and Supervision of Student Work-Based Learning?
So moved.
Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Mullenhour provides the second. This requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen. Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells. Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you. Moving on to item C, High School Policy 2.103. Ms. Knoll?
High School Policy 2.103 further defines graduation requirements, high school plans of study, and work-based learning requirements. This item presents several revisions to multiple sections of the policy as summarized below. For graduation requirements, Chapter 979 of the Public Acts of 2022 expanded access to computer science education to ensure elementary, middle, and high school students are prepared for evolving workforce need. In addition to requiring computer science coursework, department provided professional development and a new computer science endorsement pathway for education or for educators. PC 979 requires students to complete at least 1 credit computer science to receive a traditional high school diploma. This item adds this requirement to the High School Policy 2.103 to align with revisions to the Graduation Requirements Rule 0520-01-03.06, specifying that students may fulfill computer science requirement either through their 4th credit of math, 3rd credit of science, or elective focus credit. Revision also includes various clerical changes to align with the Graduation Requirements Rule. For the graduation with honors and state distinction, TCA 4-5-102 outlines what must be contained in agency rule rather than in policy. As such, this item deletes the distinction requirements from policy because now they will be contained in rule. For the work-based learning framework, Chapter 946 for the Public Acts of 2022 requires a State Board develop an Industry 4.0 diploma distinction for high school students interested in pursuing a career in a high-need, high-skill industry after graduation. PC 946 also includes detailed breakdown on how LEAs assign credit to students enrolled in work-based learning courses. This item adds this breakdown from PC 946 to the work-based learning framework section of this policy. For the plan of study, this item also presents revisions to high school plan of study requirements. State Board Rule 0520-01-03.03 governs the academic standards and courses of study in public schools, including the requirement for students to create a plan of study to prepare for their success after high school. This policy further defines the purpose and steps to develop this plan. State Board staff met with the Department of Education School Counselor Advisory Council and solicited feedback from several stakeholder groups, including the Tennessee Education Association, the American School Counselor Association, Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents, the Tennessee School Counselor Association, and Professional Educators of Tennessee. No changes have been made since the first reading. For the occupational industry professional, lastly, this item introduces language encouraging LEAs to partner with local occupational industry professionals to support occupational instruction in work-based learning opportunities. Between first and final reading, additional changes were made to align to the Move On When Ready ACT benchmark score and updated ACT benchmark scores approved by the Tennessee Higher Education Commission at the January 2023 Commission meeting. The Department of Education recommends approval of this item on final reading, and the State Board staff concurs with this recommendation.
Questions or comments for Ms. Knoll? Is there a motion to approve this item? Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Eby provides a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much for your
you.
great work. Moving on to item D, Standards for School-Administered Child Care Programs, Health and Safety Rule. Ms. Robin Ye.
Good morning, board members. Robin Ye, Deputy Director of Policy at the Department of Education. Tennessee Code Annotated 49-1, 1101 through 1108 allows the State Board of Education through the Commissioner of Education to set rules for all school-administered child care programs. Additionally, TCA 49-6-1601 requires all schools and child care programs to designate a child abuse coordinator. Chapter 781 of the Public Acts of 2022 revised the requirements of child abuse reporting for schools to clarify that if a person suspects child abuse, that individual may report the information directly to DCS and law enforcement before notifying the designated child abuse coordinator. This item recommends revisions to the Health and Safety Rule Section .10 to align with Public Chapter 781 of 2022. State Board staff held a rulemaking hearing on January 6th to collect public feedback, and no comments were submitted. There were minor clerical changes made between first and final reading, and the department recommends approval of this item on final reading, and State Board staff concurs. Happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments? Mr. Eby.
Thank you. Not going to change anything here, but as I read through this, I read terms like teacher can assume duties of any type in an infant room. They must be oriented in the foregoing sudden infant death. I don't know how oriented is defined. Is that trained or whatever? And then I look through and I see parents or guardians of every child enrolled shall be notified immediately. One of the following communicable diseases has all these listed. Doesn't have COVID listed. It does say any other illnesses identified by the Public Health Department. I just think maybe we ought to relook at this chapter as a whole in the future and see how it can be updated.
Yeah, and those are really great suggestions, and that's something that we've been thinking about as well. Is it's I think in terms of the entire chapter, it's been a while since it's been fully updated and cleaned up. So we are thinking through kind of the right time to do that and do a cleanup revision of the chapter. So thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second?
Mr. Mullenhour provides a second. Any further discussion? This requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen. Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells. Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. The next item is E, District and School Operations Assessment Materials Reviews Rule. Dr. David Laird.
Good morning, David Laird, Assistant Commissioner for Assessment and Accountability. Chapter 1032 of the Public Acts of 2022 requires a local education agency or the Tennessee Department of Education to provide any statewide testing materials or proposed statewide testing materials to a member of the General Assembly upon the member's request to inspect and review materials. PC 1032 authorized the State Board of Education to promulgate rules outlining the stipulations for the General Assembly member to request and inspect statewide assessment materials while protecting the integrity and confidentiality of testing materials. This item presents a new assessment materials review rule in compliance with PC 1032. The rule outlines the process for a General Assembly member to request and access statewide testing materials in the possession of an LEA or the department, including TCAP and end-of-course assessments. The rule ensures that the provision of these statewide testing materials to a member of the Tennessee General Assembly complies with test security requirements, existing state and federal laws governing information release, including the Data Accessibility, Transparency, and Accountability Act and the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act. The State Board held a rulemaking hearing on January 6th to collect public feedback, and no comments were submitted. Minor revisions were made between first and final reading, including revisions to clarify the processes by which a member may request testing materials from the department or LEA, and clarifying that testing materials that are able to be requested do not include student answer sheets or other materials completed by the student. There is no fiscal impact for LEAs in this item. And the department recommends approval of this item on final read, and the State Board staff concurs with the recommendation, and I'm happy to take additional questions on this item.
Are there any questions or comments for Dr. Laird?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Mollenauer.
So, Dr. Laird, this may be a question directed towards you, and I know also that Charlie Buffalino and I have had a few conversations on this, but just to kind of step back for a moment, you know, the legislature passed a law, and our job is to institute the rules that fit within the not just the black and white letter of that law, but also the intent, the legislative intent. And there's a couple of things that concerned me initially about the way that this rule is being proposed, the language of this particular rule. And I went back and I looked at, you know, the law that had been passed, and I went back and I looked at some of the debates that had occurred, and some of the, and I had a couple conversations with some of the co-sponsors of this, of the original law, and I'm still fairly concerned that there's two things that may not be aligned with their intent. And in conversations with the department and others, I think we've resolved one of those. So I'll talk about that one first. It's maybe the easy one. And that is the requirement that the legislator would have to review the material in person, and as originally written, or I should say as the rule is proposed here, it would require, it gives latitude for the department to determine where that would occur. The concern, of course, is that we've got legislators from all over the state, and you know, we want to make sure that they have access to this material in a way that's efficient and that's not requiring them to drive inordinate distances and so forth. But I think we've resolved that. I'm not going to spend more time on that. Again, in conversations with Charlie and others, I think that one's okay. The second concern was the imposition of a training, a test security training protocol, whatever that may be.
Yep.
And you know, in my mind, legislators who are already working on sensitive issues and working with sensitive material, and who are already looking at records from agencies, you know, multiple agencies, and already sort of in the practice of signing non-disclosure agreements and understanding that their responsibility is inherently one that requires judgment, to ask them to have to go through a training, a test security training protocol struck me as being a little much. So I went back and I looked at the law, and there's nothing in the law itself that references that. So I guess I would ask Charlie if you could maybe help us understand what conversations you had in crafting this rule that would give us comfort in knowing that the legislator's intent is being followed by what's being proposed.
Thank you for the question. Charlie Buffalino with the Department of Education, and I'm also joined by Christy Ballard, our General Counsel, who can articulate some of these points too. So I want to make sure that we come back to a conversation with Dr. Laird about what's at stake here and why some of these protocols are really critical for our students and for our state going forward, and for our state legislators to protect them as well. But to speak to the legislative history and address your question directly, so the original version of this bill, if you read it, is a pretty wide open, as originally drafted. It even states that members are allowed to share this with whoever they want, with the exception of parents of children in schools or children in schools themselves. We as an administration initially put a philosophical flag on this bill, essentially meaning in layman's terms that we were opposed to it. This bill was going to die in its first legislative committee. It got rolled a couple times by the sponsor. The sponsors were former State Representative Bruce Griffey and State Senator Mark Pody. I think it's fair to say that the initial idea and the main driver of the legislation was Representative Griffey. He reached out to me and said, hey, I know you have concerns here. You've articulated them to me. I'd really like to do something here in this space. What is it that would make you comfortable with this? And so we jointly drafted a single amendment that went onto the bill, and that's what is in the public chapter you see before you today. And the other thing I'll point out, there are several elements of this rule that aren't spelled out directly in the law. For example, you brought up an NDA, which is another part of this. That's not explicitly called for in the law either. It gives the department latitude, and I point you to subsection C, particularly C24 in particular, which states that the department won't share materials or conduct pieces that will jeopardize in any way the validity, reliability of the test. And so that is sort of the legislative language that we're using for the justification here. And I can assure you that Representative Griffey certainly was okay with that and supportive of that, as was the state Senate sponsor, and that's the amendment he put on the bill too. And this was sort of the agreement that I think it's fair to say led to the passage of this law in the first place. The other point I'll make before maybe we transition to some of the functional components is I want to be clear, the legislature still will have an opportunity to weigh in on these rules through their oversight and purview as the Government Operations Committee. So they will still have an opportunity to accept or reject this rule if and when it gets to them from the state board. And so it is not as if they won't have another opportunity. We always have instances where after laws are passed, legislators have questions and say, I thought it was this, not that. That's not the same thing as legislative intent. And I brought Christy up here with me to maybe articulate that sort of if needed. But we worked very directly with the sponsors of this to develop this, and I'm fairly confident that this rule before you today is in alignment with that.
Thank you for that context. And just to clarify, you said that you spoke with Senator Pody and that he was in agreement with the amendment, or he was in agreement with the rules as proposed.
Thank you for allowing me to clarify that. I have not had a direct conversation with Senator Pody on the rules. I had conversations with him with the amendment and when we were moving forward at that time.
Got it. In the conversations that you had with Senator Pody at that time, was there ever mention of a test security training protocol?
Yes, there was.
Okay. And what other co-sponsors did you speak with?
I spoke on the bill in one of the House subcommittees when I was called up to testify on it, believe. I did not have private one-on-one conversations with other co-sponsors. This really was a situation in which we worked directly with Representative Griffey, and once he and the administration had an agreement, the bill sort of sailed through from that point forward.
Okay. And I believe you were going to have someone else speak.
If it would be helpful to you to talk about the functional importance of having this, I think that would be good as well. Do you want to add something?
Christy Ballard, General Counsel for the department. The intent of the law and this rule is to not only protect the integrity of the assessment, but to protect the state against liability, which could in fact be quite significant. And I believe that this training also protects individual legislators who view the test. In my 20 years of reviewing our assessment contracts, there have been times through the years where we've signed contracts and license agreements that should there be a breach, or if we had to defend ourselves against an accusation of a breach, could have cost the state millions of dollars. So not only is this training people to protect against a breach, it's showing that we have done our due diligence so that if there was an accusation of a breach, the state could properly defend itself against that accusation. So sometimes it's about making sure that everyone understands and that we can show that we've done everything possible to protect against that liability and a breach. And to be honest, we have, and Angie can speak more to this than I can. We have teachers who live this every day, who make mistakes and suffer serious consequences. And we know that not every legislator is an educator, and we want them to feel very comfortable with, what is acceptable and what's not. So, but thank you. It's a good topic to speak on.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a good example of, and frankly, Charlie, I think how we do work well together in trying to really understand what the issue is and involve legislators and involve other stakeholders. It's important to understand the nuance. But if I zoom way out for just a second, I think we have to be careful following that rationale that you just explained too far, because to the extent that we would allow vendors and vendor contracts to begin to keep even our own legislators, our elected legislators, from being able to access information in a meaningful way. And I realize that may be an overstatement in this case, but to the extent that we allow contract terms and those kinds of concerns to allow things to happen not in the sunlight, but in the dark, I think we have a much bigger problem. And I'm not suggesting that that's happening here, but I'm saying I think we need to be very intentional in deferring and giving deference to the legislator and giving them access to the information that they need to do their job and to safeguard the interests of all Tennesseans. And if a vendor wants to do business with the state of Tennessee and they have terms in their contracts that wouldn't permit that, then I would question, is this the right vendor for the job? And again, I'm not suggesting any changes with respect to this specific issue here as much as more this is the philosophical element of, I think legislators should be able to safeguard rights and interests of all Tennesseans. And if that means that that we have to renegotiate contracts or simply tell some vendors, no, you can't do business with us because your terms are too onerous, then so be it.
I would say that a lot of those terms are because if an item or a part of an item is used in other states, there is great liability that if there's a breach in one state, that means across the country that item cannot be used. And so while I can appreciate your concern with that, there were reasons in the past when we needed items and we needed prompts and things, and it was it necessitated us to sign contracts that were a little I wouldn't say onerous, but made us really think twice about doing trainings and making sure everyone understood the seriousness of the provisions. So.
Okay. Well, just to advance this one forward, and Charlie, I'm looking at you here for confirmation. My understanding again is that with respect to the concern over the meeting location, that's resolved with language that's been proposed as an amendment today. That's resolved.
We're in agreement with that, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then really, it's the issue that remains is just the test security training and whether or not that is something that that is in alignment with the intent of the legislature, and that they have taken into account all of the factors that your team has discussed here today, and whether or not they would be satisfied with that language. As I'm understanding from you today, if we were to approve a test security training protocol measure of some kind, that would be subject to further review by legislators. And I'm going to look to Nathan. If you can please confirm for us today kind of what that process looks like, and is there in fact an opportunity for legislators to just make sure that what we're doing here today is aligned with their intent?
Madam Chairman and Mr. Mullenhour, so what the process is whatever rules that you all pass become State Board of Education rules. And those rules are up nearly monthly in front of the Joint Government Operations Committee. Which Senator Pody sits on, and they could give a negative recommendation to the rule, and that would cause the rule to cease to be in effect as of the passage of what's called the Omnibus Rules Bill. So it's kind of sort of the opposite way that the federal rules are done. They do have to agree to it, but whether they vote in favor or against it, it would still be in effect until that point in time at the end of session when the omnibus rules bill would be passed without it in there. So it would be in effect for a period of time, but not thereafter. And I assume that'll be something that the counselor and I will end up in front of the committee on.
Well, the one thing I would add is it's generally agency practice, and I know we've done this before, that if a rule gets a negative recommendation, you pull it at that point in time so you can start working on correcting it. We certainly wouldn't recommend waiting until the omnibus bill goes through if something like that were to happen.
Okay.
Ms. Sanders, is there something you want to add?
Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the Board. I was just going to basically clarify what Mr. Buffalino just said, is that if we saw it going down that path in terms of major issues being flagged by legislators, we would withdraw the bill. That there is a process, or withdraw the rule. There's a process for that. And then a lot of times promise to members that we will bring it back before this board to make edits in alignment with what they are asking the board to do.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to have some comments to make, but Mr. Eby, please go first.
I just have a question. What does the test security training buy you that the NDA doesn't buy you from a legal perspective?
Thank you for that question. The basic premise, and I'll defer to Christy and David as well, because I would like David to describe what we're talking about here in terms of that test security protocol. I think that's important context. Essentially, to put it in practical terms, an NDA is a commitment for you to not knowingly violate those terms or disclose that information. Part of the concern here, and we talked a little bit, not all legislators are educators, what the test security training buttresses or does in addition is gives them the information in the background to make sure they don't unintentionally violate those terms. And we don't want to get into a situation where we have a violation of an NDA. We don't want to have to resolve that with legislators. We're trying to protect all parties concerned. And it's not just the millions of dollars that are at stake with the testing and the test contracts. These tests are important for our students. They're important for us to measure, and we want to minimize any risk to that. And, a 30-minute asynchronous training that we're talking about, while, is a little bit of an additional burden, we think is a reasonable one towards ensuring that protection.
So it's sort of belts and suspenders stuff.
Absolutely.
Charlie, on that.
Any other comments before I proceed? Because I do want to make some comments.
I have a follow-up question to what we were discussing here. And Charlie, one of the things that you and I discussed was you being willing to go on the record today and describe for us what that test training measure might look like. Because the rule itself doesn't, it could be 4 hours, it could be 10 hours, it could be 10 minutes. Can you just be very specific in helping us understand and the legislators maybe understand what that expectation is going to be?
Thank you for that opportunity, and I'd go so far as to say we'd be willing to actually put out guidance, to actually put it in writing as well. But let me defer to the actual expert here, Dr. Laird, to give you that description.
The test security trainings have existed in a few different incarnations for different audiences. We have versions of this that are designed for district staff that are a little bit more robust with the actual handling and packaging and shipping of materials. We have other versions that are designed for people that are closer simply to the handling and administration of those materials, and those would be the type of assessment or the types of trainings that would be most appropriate for the legislature, sort of given their weight and scope and content. Typically, these are done in 30-minute sessions. Whenever possible, we do like to do these in person. Because it does give us an opportunity to clarify questions that exist. The most important content associated with these trainings is just being explicitly clear about what needs to be protected and what doesn't. Just as an anecdotal point to reference the significance of this, a person reviewing a third grade ELA assessment and going home and saying something as seemingly innocuous as, there was a really interesting passage about butterflies on that test, is potentially a very significant security breach. We often source passages that are in the public domain. So it is not unthinkable to think that if that were suddenly to make the rounds on social media, that the third grade test has a passage about butterflies, that this would not set off just a flurry of interest in lower grade literacy passages that is somewhere about butterflies. And again, the core concern for the department is always these tests are expensive and the stakes are very significant. And anything that happens that degrades the quality of the information that we learn is a massive weight on the return on investment and the quality of the changes that people will make, because suddenly they'll be concerned about the validity of the test. So again, the duration of that can be very light. I think 30 minutes would be perfectly appropriate and sufficient for that purpose. And again, the core concern here would just to be explicitly clear, perhaps even overly so, about just how sensitive these materials are and just the extent to which that security is required. It's not just about the text of the items themselves.
I appreciate all of the comments that are coming from the board members and all of the responses that you all have provided. And I sit here and I'm thinking about this topic, and I think it's important for the legislators to know and go through the training, because it needs to be abundantly clear to them what's at stake. And I think we should never, ever assume that every legislator fully and completely gets this and understands that. And sometimes people sign a document that's put before them and they're not exactly cognizant of everything that they're signing. So I think that the test security training would provide that layer of protection for all of us, and particularly them as individuals. And I'll say this, and I don't want to say these things too many times, but I was in banking and there were tons of regulations, and there was one in particular that I could have gone to jail. Anybody who worked at the bank could have gone to jail if we did not completely and clearly understand what was at stake. So we had to go through training. There was no exemption, no exceptions. So we knew we were putting the bank at risk. We were putting ourselves at risk. So I would prefer, this is my opinion, that we continue with it the way that it's written, unless somebody finds objection and some other amendment that needs to be made, and go before government ops with it as it's been written, and let them say, we're not satisfied. We want to change the rule. But they'll understand, and I would want somebody from the department to be there too, to state the facts, the specifics about what's at stake, so they clearly understand and there is no misunderstanding. So I wanted to add that into the record.
And Madam Chair, if I could add, I just want to express to Mr. Mollenauer that we philosophically are very much aligned here, right? Accountability, just as assessments, they only work if people respond to them. And if people don't trust the assessments, if they don't feel like we've been transparent, if they feel like they're in the dark, particularly with the stakes associated with this, the department clearly understands the concern that that represents. So we feel the push and pull that you're referring to, like the department absolutely internalizes that. We do not want to be obstructionist about this in any way, shape, or form. We're just trying to strike the right line, and I think we're just a little bit askew from where you are, but I think the point is incredibly well taken, and we're happy to continue to work with this to make sure that we come up with the lightest version possible that allows us to feel like we're being good stewards of this information.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Morrow.
I just want to say first, thank you. I think one of the things that we forget about in test security is that, and I appreciate the work that you guys are doing on this, as I'm sending all the teachers that we have here, is that you put all of this time, effort, energy working with kids. And so then there's this anticipation of result and phenomenal result, and then one unintended breach can invalidate, which is a gut punch to, I think, anybody who has ever put that much time into working with their kids. And so, I think I just appreciate your concern around it. I think we can work with everybody. I mean, the idea is we're sharing information here, but I think I want to just be cognizant of what those outcomes of tests can mean in light of those people who are putting day-to-day work in with the kids in the classrooms that ultimately are waited with bated breath, and to think that could potentially be invalidated by a unintentional slip would just be awful. So I think it's a worthy conversation to have with the operations committee on how this, and I wouldn't say light or heavy in time. It's not really what's onerous or isn't onerous. My thought is more of what's effective, right? What's a valuable training that meets the proper weight of the assessment. So just want to encourage you to continue that dialogue.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Eby.
Yes, thank you. In my business, in the nuclear business, we likewise have to have training all the time to prevent unintended comments, et cetera. And when I first read this, it says necessary test security training, I didn't understand the reason why you were putting that in there. And so I would encourage you to be sure that people understand why the security training is important and the purpose of that. I don't know if words put in there or tell the legislators, but yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying.
Madam Chair?
Other comments? Yes, Mr. Mollenhauer.
Thank you. And this has been a great conversation. I'm going to, for the sake of time, I'm going to try to advance it and make a proposal here for everybody to consider. Two clarifying questions. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page.
Yep.
The expectation is that the training protocol would be roughly 30 minutes. And as I understand, it could also be an online training of some sort that the legislator could undergo. Can you please confirm that that's a correct expectation?
I think that's the right expectation. I would flag that given the materials are viewed in person, what has happened previously in similar circumstances is we simply sit down and have a 30-minute conversation with the members before they review the materials and satisfy that requirement in that moment.
So it could be either online or it could be immediately prior to their viewing of the materials, which makes perfect sense. Okay, I just want to make sure that we set the stage for the legislators who review this later to correctly connect all the different dots. I will say this, and I realize that you know, conversations that were had last year, a lot has happened since last year, and it's easy to forget things. I did speak with Senator Pody, I did speak with Representative Sapicki, and neither of them anticipated, or what they expressed to me is that they did not anticipate there being a test security training engagement of any kind. So again, I realize that a lot of time has passed and maybe memories fade, but just so that the department understands that may be a question that comes up. So I'm going to make a proposal, and this is going to be language that I believe the board has seen. I'm going to tweak it slightly to accommodate the department's requests here. The department has also seen this language. Charlie and I talked about it this morning. And Charlie, I'm going to read it verbatim as it was presented to you, with one exception, and that exception is adding back in the test security training requirement with the understanding that legislators will have a subsequent chance to ask questions about that in the Government Ops Committee. So Charlie, do you have any thoughts or questions before I read this proposed amendment?
No, thank you again for working with us.
Okay, I'm going to read it quickly here. This would be a complete replacement of Section 5 in the proposed rule. Within 5 days of the department's receipt of the request from the member pursuant to paragraph 4 or from the LEA pursuant to paragraph 3, the department shall respond to the member acknowledging receipt of the member's request. The department shall provide the requested materials to the member for the member to review in person, either at the department's offices or, if requested by the member, at the member's legislative offices in Nashville. The department, this is subsection A, the department shall provide the requested materials to the member for the member to review in person within 15 days of receipt of the request, unless another date is agreed upon by the member and the department. And I will, for the board members, the subsection A is new. It was language that we also discussed with the department and that they wanted to include. The department and member, this is subsection B, the department and member may otherwise mutually agree to a different meeting time and location. Subsection C, all test security protocols outlined in the Tennessee Test Security Manual published by the department shall be followed by the members prior to, during, and after review and receipt of the materials. Subsection D, in order to protect the validity or reliability of materials, members granted access to materials must complete a non-disclosure agreement provided by the department prior to accessing and receiving materials. Subsection E, and this is the new one, the department shall provide necessary test security training to the member prior to providing access to the materials. So I think that accommodates both the online and the immediately prior to in person. And then the last subsection F, which is unchanged from their original, the department and the member must comply with the Data Accessibility, Transparency, and Accountability Act compiled in Title 49, Chapter 1, Part 7, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, 20 U.S.C. 1232G, and TCA 107504 at all times during and after the review and receipt of materials. So that is the proposed language. Charlie, do you have any disagreement with any of that?
We are comfortable with that language and supportive of the amendment.
Thank you.
So you are officially making that as a motion to the board?
So moved.
That statement you just read in full?
Correct.
Okay.
So moved.
Is there anything you want to add before we take questions from the other members? Because I do want to get a second eventually.
No, I think I appreciate the time that we spent on it.
Thank you. Mr. Holt?
Madam Chair, I just have a clarifying question, Jordan. As I was following this and looking at the red line version before your amendment, the sentence, the second sentence in paragraph A in the red line up for today, that all test security protocols outlined in the Tennessee Test Security Manual published by the department shall be followed by the member prior to, during, and after review and receipt of the materials. I may have overlooked that in what you read, but I didn't, as I was trying to track all of it compared against the language here, I didn't hear that, and so I wasn't sure if that was intentionally removed or if that would remain in.
Yeah, so I realize that there's a lot of conversation, a lot of things happening on the fly, and it's easy to miss things as they're coming from different directions. That is accounted for in subsection C. I'll read it right now so you can follow it in the original language. All test security protocols outlined in the Tennessee Test Security Manual published by the department shall be followed by the members prior to, during, and after review and receipt of the material. So that is effectively unchanged.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Madam Chair, just
Mr. Eby?
just point of clarity, several paragraphs that use the word shall, several paragraphs that use the word must. I would recommend that we stick with shall, consistent with what we've done throughout.
Yes, I believe you're referring to must in subsections D and their original language in what would now be subsection F. Yes, let's include that change both to shall.
Okay. Ms. Sanders?
One clarifying question, Mr. Mollenhauer. The current language says 15 business days as well as 5 business days, and you just said days, and so I just want to clarify for the record, did you mean to include business days or remove business days?
Great question. I have typed in business days because I copied it verbatim, but yes, thank you for that clarification, business days. So that would be unchanged from their original.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments before we get a second? Okay, we have a motion and a few additions to that or changes. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Eby provides a second. This is a roll call vote, first to approve the amendment as stated into the record with the additional minor changes. Mr. Griffin, would you call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Holt?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
Mr. Mollenhauer?
Aye.
Mr. Morrow?
Aye.
Mr. Wells? Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes on the amendment.
The motion is approved based on the number of votes, and that's to approve the amendment. Now we're going to move into approval of the rule with the amendment. Any other discussion before we go there? Okay, is there a motion to approve this item as amended?
So moved.
Mr. Mollenhauer provides the motion.
Second.
The other M, Mr. Morrow provides the second. Any further discussion? This requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Cobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Holt?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen? Mr. Mollenhauer?
Aye.
Mr. Morrow?
Aye.
Mr. Wells? Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you both very much. Great work, as always.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Thank you. Okay, moving to item F, literacy and specialty area standards for educator preparation, policy 5.505, Ms. Brooke Amos. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. Great. Brooke Amos, Assistant Commissioner of Human Capital with the department. This item updates the literacy and specialty area standards within Educator Preparation Policy 5.505 for educator and instructional leader preparation to include effective criteria for instructing students with characteristics of dyslexia. This item also includes updates to clarify foundational literacy skills. Between first and final reading, minor revisions were made to remove the literacy standards and specialty area program standards for the school speech language teacher pre-K-12 endorsement area. The speech language teacher endorsement is retired, and Tennessee no longer offers programs leading to licensure for this endorsement, as individuals are now eligible for equivalent endorsement based on credentials they hold instead. Thus, the information was removed from policy. The Department of Education recommends approval of this item on final reading. The State Board of Education staff concurs with this recommendation. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve this item? Mr. Coppins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Darnell provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to take item G, Educator Licensure Rule, and that's Mr. Michael Durline, and after that, we will take a 10-minute break. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Michael Durline, Deputy Executive Director at the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education's Educator Licensure Rule governs academic teacher licenses, occupational teacher licenses, and school services personnel licenses. Revisions to these rules are proposed to create additional flexibility, specifically around pathways for continuous renewal of practitioner licenses, new pathways to renew professional licenses, and new pathways to reactivate professional licenses. A rulemaking hearing was held on January 6, 2023 to collect public feedback. No comments were submitted. Minor revisions were made between first and final reading to clarify when requirements for professional licensure renewal must be completed and to clarify that the department determines the most appropriate minimum level of education for occupational licensure areas. Revisions were also made to specify that individuals seeking to advance from a practitioner occupational license to a professional occupational license may do so if they hold a professional academic license. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Are there any questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Mollenauer.
Thank you. Michael, I know that the cover page references, and you just referenced the regional accreditation. I know that you and I have had, and other members of the team have had conversations about that here, even the last few weeks. I guess with that context in mind, is there anything here in your mind that affects or that would somehow limit our options in evaluating the merits of some of the regional accreditation requirements that we've been discussing?
I think that there are kind of two factors that come into play with the requirement for regional accreditation. One is an entity seeking to become an educator preparation provider in Tennessee, and that lives in the educator preparation rule. In this rule, there is a requirement that somebody hold an undergraduate degree from a regionally accredited institution. I think that's something that's been in place for quite a while, and that as we kind of take a big step back and look at licensure on the whole over the next year, I think it's something worth discussing as to whether that's something that should continue to be in place and what would be the merits of leaving that in place.
Okay. So to clarify, what the reference to regional accreditation here is clarifying what's already in place. It's not a new
Correct.
imposition.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure, because in light of the other conversations, I just want to make sure that I'm not misunderstanding something, and we're making decisions today without having fully concluded the other conversations that we're having with respect to regional accreditation and EPPs and so forth.
That's right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Coppins provides a second. Any further discussion? This requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Mr. Mollenauer.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells. Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Michael. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10:40 and start promptly. Thank you very much. and we will reconvene with item H, middle grades policy 2.102. Ms. Allie Reed.
Thank you. Good morning again, Allie Reed, Director of Engagement and Accountability for the State Board. So on final reading is our middle grades policy with proposed updates to the plan of study and the addition of a section on industry professional partnerships. Between first and final reading today, State Board staff met with the Department of Education's School Advisory Council and other educator and school counselor stakeholder groups for final review. And only small formatting changes have been made since first reading. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve this item? Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Holt provides the second. Any discussion? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you. I think you have the next item? No, you do not. Okay. I, professional assessments for Tennessee educator policies, Mr. Michael Durline.
Good morning again. Michael Durline, Deputy Executive Director with the State Board. This item is the Professional Assessments for Tennessee Educators Policy. To become a licensed educator in Tennessee, state law and state board rules require certain individuals to demonstrate both content and pedagogical competencies through assessment. This proposal is to remove the requirement of a pedagogical assessment for educators who are enrolled in job-embedded preparation programs, recognizing that they are serving as teacher of record in that role, being evaluated by their administrators and supported by their program. In addition, we are proposing to drop content assessment requirements for educators who demonstrate that they hold a major in the content area. In October, that provision was specifically focused on job-embedded educators. And since first and final reading, we've received quite a bit of feedback on these proposals and have made the following adjustments. We have shifted the date of implementation of the elimination of both specialty area content assessments and pedagogical assessments from September 1, 2023 to June 1, 2023, with the intent of capturing educators who are seeking to obtain, renew, or advance a license prior to August 31st, 2023. We are also proposing to expand the specialty area content areas where a content assessment is not required to include educators who obtain an undergraduate major in the content area. So not just focusing on job-embedded educators, but also those in undergraduate programs that lead to a content area major. We have also specified which endorsements and assessments are included in this recommendation and kind of narrowed it down to a select few in the core content areas and world languages. And lastly, introduced assessment options based on the department's recommendation for music endorsements to provide flexibility and increase the alignment between music preparation programs and the assessment required. That is all I have. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Are there questions or comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Mullenhour.
Just a very brief comment. I know that there were many emails. There was a lot of feedback received on this particular item, and I thought we had a very robust conversation about it yesterday. And Michael, I thought you did a great job of presenting the rationale, the research, the data. I know Erica on our team did as well. And I would just say to anyone who's watching who cares about this particular agenda item, while there may not be a robust conversation in this moment, we spent quite a bit of time on it yesterday, and if you have any questions about it, I would just refer you to the State Board of Education website where you can watch that dialogue. It was I found it to be quite informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. I think it's important for us to note that because many times people do not understand that we do have a lot of time to discuss these items in workshops. So it's important to say that. I'll have a couple of other comments, but Mr. Eby, I believe you have something to say.
Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Mullenhour said. I would just add one other comment is that we recognize that this is a process, and we may take action today, but it doesn't mean that's the end of the process. We're going to continue to work to improve the process so that it is clear. I think that was one of the comments that we got, and there is a process that people can work through.
Thank you for that. I echo and agree with both of you, and I just want to add just one more comment, and that really speaks to the fact that we've always stood for rigor. We've always stood for teacher quality. We never want to appear that we are lowering those standards, lowering those expectations, and it appears that we might be. That is not the intention. The intention is to be logical and make practical, good decisions regarding individuals who have graduated with a content in a content area and should move on, and those that are in job embedded. So I think that there clearly is a message that we're sending that we still want to maintain rigor and we still want to do what makes sense while not affecting negatively our candidate pool, the quality of our candidates. Yes, we've gotten lots of feedback, and yes, there's some that are asking for a complete elimination of EdTPA, complete elimination, and there are those in EPPs that are on different sides of the issues. And so you can see it's complicated, and it's not a simple solution or something that's going to please everybody. There's no question about that. But we're always trying to do what's best ultimately in education and for our students. So I just wanted to add that. Is there a motion to approve this item unless there's more comments? Yes, Mr. Collins.
Thank you. I probably spent the past almost 3 months in conversation with traditional EPPs in the Memphis area that reached out on this, and also to balance that, solicited input from some of the other non-traditional programs just to ensure that I was getting the full perspective on the on this particular issue. And as recent as Monday, was on a Zoom with several students who are both undergrad and in post-baccalaureate programs with traditional EPPs. And sorry I wasn't here in town to be able to make the robust discussion yesterday, but I just wanted to just make sure that those folks who I talked to, who may be watching, who I'll continue to have conversation with, know that there was extensive conversation with Mr. Derline and the state board staff, and understanding that, as Madam Chair noted, there are a number of different perspectives and schools of thought on what is the right thing to do. My comfort on this particular item came from Mr. Derline's presentation that talked about the next step in the process and the ongoing conversation and comprehensive review, so that stakeholders and constituents understand that this is a step, not the final step, and that there will be additional input sought, there will be more review and evaluation going forward to look at the licensure situation in its totality. So I just wanted to make sure that we made that clear and stated that for the record for all those who I've been in contact with and those that may be concerned about this across the state. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Mr. Morrow.
I just want to follow up. And, you know, we talked about the last meeting that ultimately, and I just really think it's important that you look at, as we look at it from all the different perspectives, right? The EPP saying, hey, we have regulations we're trying to follow. We talk to superintendents at the local level saying, we're trying to get qualified people, but we need people. And kind of everywhere in between, I think it's just important that we continue to look at what is our ultimate goal, which is to create an attractive destination for educators to work in the state of Tennessee, and that those educators are highly qualified.
Yeah.
And so, you know, working with the multiple constituents that have sometimes competing interests to accomplish the same goal is going to be important. And I think as this is just a step, I think we need to always continue to look at what is the purpose of this and how will this ultimately enhance the educational delivery within the state of Tennessee. And so, again, I'm comfortable because it is a step, but want to just make sure that we don't
Stop.
And look at that. And I think Dr. Morrison's also said just consistency and clarity in trying to align attractive, right, job market with high quality people that are going to work with our students. And so I just wanted to make that comment as we go into this.
Thank you for that. Excellent. Any other questions or comments? Okay, is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Cobbins provides the motion and Mr. Eby provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you very much for your great work. Next up is Mr. Nathan James, Board's Meeting Policy 1.400.
Good morning. Nathan James, Deputy Executive Director for Legislative and External Affairs for the Board. This is our Board Meetings Policy 1.400. This item presents changes to the State Board's meetings policy needed to provide better clarity around agenda adoption and development, distribution of materials prior to board meetings, reading requirements, and adds provisions related to rulemaking hearings. Updates were also made related to persons granted permission by the chair to address the board. Minor typographical changes were made for clarity and consistency. Changes made since the first reading include the clarification of the duties of the officers of the board and the circumstances under which an interim election of officers may take place. It further creates the honorific title of Chair Emeritus and prescribes the circumstances under which the board may grant that title. The ability of the board to transact its business is essential to the rule and policy-making role assigned to it in law, and this function is requisite to the duties, plans, and aspirations detailed throughout our master plan. Some of the changes that were made in there include clarification that suspension of this policy or any portion of the rules of order may only be done by a majority of the members entitled to the vote, as those rules are very much in place, not only for the operation of the board, but for the protection of minority viewpoints on that board. The SBE staff recommends approval of this item for a final reading, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item? Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Jensen provides the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you very much, Mr. James. Item 4K, Category 2 and 3 Private School Accrediting Agency Policy, Ms. Angie Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the Board. Presenting to you on final reading a new policy titled Category 2 and 3 Private School Accrediting Agencies, number 3.500. Tennessee Code Annotated 49-6-3001 requires every child residing in Tennessee between the ages of 6 and 17 to attend a public or non-public school. Non-public schools are defined in law as including private schools, church-related schools, and independent homeschools. State Board of Education Rule 05200702 currently establishes the different categories of non-public schools in Tennessee, the process for approval of those schools and their accrediting or membership agencies, as well as the requirements that schools and accrediting agencies must comply with. Revisions to that rule were approved on final reading at our October 2022 meeting. Those revisions require that the list of Category 3 accrediting agencies be moved out of the rule and into this newly created policy, as the names of those agencies change often and are more suited to be included in a policy rather than a rule for that reason. Additionally, it's proposed that this policy also lists the Category 2 accrediting agencies that are approved by the board, as that list currently does not live in policy anywhere. And there have been no changes since first reading. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Eby provides the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you very much. Moving to item L, Charter School Authorizer Evaluation 2022 Outcomes. Ms. Allie Reed.
Hello again. Allie Reed, Director of Engagement and Accountability for the State Board. On first and final reading today are our 2022 Charter School Authorizer Evaluation Outcomes. The State Board is charged with ensuring effective operation of authorizers and evaluating authorizer quality, and our State Board approved evaluation rubric is aligned to our Board Policy 6.111, which is our quality authorizing standards. Charter school authorizers are evaluated at least biennially, and the process includes a thorough review of documentation submitted by the authorizer, as well as interviews with the school leaders, the authorizing staff, and a review of any appeals history if applicable. The 2022 evaluation process ran from this past August through January and included an evaluation of the Achievement School District, Metro Nashville Public Schools, and the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. The item includes the 3 evaluation reports, which detail the ratings for each of the substandards, evaluative comments explaining the documentation that was used to determine those standards, as well as provide feedback, an overall rating, and any necessary follow-up actions. So you are voting today to approve the overall ratings for each of the evaluated authorizers. Authorizers had an opportunity to review the evaluation reports prior to finalizing, and these reports will be posted to the State Board's website following your vote today. This evaluation round completes our first full cycle of evaluations for all authorizers in Tennessee, and we'll begin the second round this fall. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Eby?
Yes, again, thank you, Ally, for all that you've done here. And one of the, I think, most positive things that comes out of this, the assessments, are the lessons learned and how you're sharing them among the various charter authorizers and best practices. And just keep that up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam
Other
Chair?
comments? Yes, Mr. Mollenauer.
Yes, I would echo what Mr. Eby just said, and you know, we had a robust, fairly robust conversation on this yesterday, and I won't go through all of that, but there were a few things that I wanted to highlight for anyone who might not have seen it. First of all, the State Charter Commission scored an the exemplary level, as it's indicated, and I'm grateful for the work that they're doing. I'm more grateful, however, for the example that they set. I think it's important for us as both the board and really the department to kind of that team together to aspire to set the example that we would expect others to follow. So on the one hand, you know, the Charter Commission has done a great job. I think the ASD, I know, has been challenged for a number of years. As I said yesterday, I'm a little frustrated that we're not able to hold up the ASD also as an example to others to follow. It scored the lowest in this cohort. And there were a few questions yesterday that were directed, I believe, towards Charlie and Dr. Carney, as Dr. Carney was not here. I did have 2 or 3 follow-up questions for Dr. Carney, if you wouldn't mind. A couple things I wanted to kind of set the stage. I wanted to say in setting the stage for these questions, my understanding is the ASD has been in place for about 10 years. Its job is essentially to take over and run failing schools that perform below a certain threshold. The ASD's responsibility is to come in and try to turn around those schools. That's its mission. Been around for 10 years. In the last couple of years, my understanding is that the only schools now that it has, or the only sort of tool that it's using really to take over and turn around schools, is to implement charter schools in those areas. So charter schools are central to the mission of ASD. And that raises the question here, in order for the ASD to be effective, it needs to be effective at setting up and monitoring and implementing charter school programs. And you know, based on the scores that we're seeing here today, it's failing at that mission. So the question is, what specifically are you anticipating will change over the next, call it 6 to 12 months, that will help to course correct the trajectory that the ASD is currently on, so that it can be better equipped to execute its mission in establishing or approving or monitoring the charter schools that are essentially doing the work to turn these schools around? That's my first question, is what specifically are we doing to effectuate that turnaround effort?
Thank you for the question and the opportunity. Eve Carney, Deputy Commissioner, Tennessee Department of Education. I would agree with you on the statement about being an exemplar. I share that. I want the ASD and its authorizing practices to be an exemplar, not just in Tennessee, but even nationally, knowing that an unconventional district that actually is focused on turnaround can be successful and can be a high-quality authorizer. So we are certainly share that as our aspiration. What I can say is that over the last probably 12 to 18 months, we have been working to reset the Achievement School District in a couple of very important ways. One, we have been working to move to a full charter model and have done so at the beginning of this current school year. We now no longer are directly operating schools, and so in that reset, we've also reset the whole structure, onboarded fully a brand new staff as of July 1. That charge from me to them has been that we are going to become that exemplar. I can say with confidence that this team is doing incredible work and has already since July made significant gains and actually had already begun some of the corrective actions that were identified in their report. As Charlie shared yesterday, the ASD hasn't authorized a school in the last 7 years. Are we where we want to be right now? No. Ultimately, this is my responsibility, and I will take that and feel very confident that under the leadership of Robin Kopp currently, who oversees the full turnaround framework, and myself, we will get there. Are we making gains? Yes. I honestly am optimistic that in several months we would love the opportunity to come back and share some of those things, but I'm happy to highlight a few of those for you today. First, we have established positions specific to quality authorizing. We have an authorizing manager, we have an associate superintendent that oversees that. I think the charters that are in the ASD would tell you that they are experiencing a change in the way in which we are supporting with them and engaging with them. So we have personnel that is dedicated to that work and every day thinks about authorizing, also providing feedback to schools that are already in the ASD. Secondly, we have partnered very closely with the Charter Commission. I would applaud their score and agree that they are doing an outstanding job. Our team has been working very, very closely with them. They are an exceptional partner in that work, and what we are working to do is ensure alignment with our policies and their policies, knowing that there is a pathway now for ASD schools to go to the commission. And so we want to set our schools up and our charters up to be successful while they're in the ASD, but also long term. And so a lot of that has been in partnership with them on our school performance framework, on our policies and procedures, ensuring that what we are putting in place is reflective of their best practices and other practices nationally that are heralded as best practices. Thirdly, having regular touch points with that leadership team, hearing and working with the department more broadly to ensure that we are supporting ASD schools. I've said it a lot to folks at the department. These schools belong to all of us, and we have to be and make very conscious effort to ensure that they have the support of the whole agency in their endeavor of doing the very hard work of turning around low-performing schools.
Thank you for that context. A couple of follow-up questions. And let me first say I appreciate the personal ownership on any kind of project that is complex. Personal ownership is where you start. And that kind of leads to my next question. My understanding is that the leadership of the ASD has been it's been filled with interim leaders for quite some time. By when do you anticipate having a permanent leader who's in charge of the ASD?
Great question. A couple of notes there, and then I will answer. The interim is our Assistant Commissioner of School Turnaround, Robin Kopp, and she has been leading that work at the agency for a number of years. She is working closely with me to fill that interim role. We have in the past tried to hire that leader unsuccessfully. We are moving forward and expect to have this position filled, I would say, middle of this year at the latest. But obviously this is a very important role and one that we're trying to be thoughtful. I will say it's really challenging when we had begun that search right before the kind of early pandemic, and everything kind of got stalled and people were kind of less interested in making moves at that time. So we're optimistic that now we are moving forward. And as I said, we have a strong team. They are working incredibly hard to get this to the place where I can come back and give a report and an update to this group and be very, very proud of the work that they are doing. They are really an outstanding team, and I was with them just in Jackson. I think that was Thursday. 2 days ago, not Thursday, sorry. And so I was with them then, and their commitment and just willingness to dig deeply to address these concerns, but also just to serve the operators that we've authorized well is their mission.
So as a point of clarification, you said that you look forward to coming back and showing proudly the work that's been done,
Sure.
which I look forward to. How would you define that? If right now the score is 1.5, what can we, my understanding is that we'll have another evaluation done 12 months from now, Ally? 2 years? Okay. In 2 years, what would you anticipate that score being? What's the goal?
Well, I'm a competitive person, and I would say my goal is to be exemplary, period.
Okay. Okay. Just one more comment on this, and then I'll open the floor for others. There's in the business world, one of the sayings that we have that we frequently remind ourselves of is, if you expect different outcomes, you got to have different inputs, and it's rare that you can hope for things to get better without making meaningful changes, and sometimes those changes are painful, and I would say even oftentimes they are. But
Sure.
The concern that I would have is that this has been a known issue for some time, and that the trajectory has not changed. If it's changed at all, maybe it's neutral or worse. I would just encourage you, and we'll be asking if the scores aren't any better, okay, what painful or meaningful changes did we not make that we should have? And that might mean changes in leadership. It might mean changes in processes and those kinds of things. But I would say there's a really good chance that it starts with the leadership, and maybe you've already made those changes. But I would expect that that's where the opportunity lies. And then I'll close on this. If there's anything that we can do as the state board, and we had this conversation yesterday in workshop, if there's anything that we can do, please let us know. And I know that Ally is 100% behind helping to coordinate and collaborate and share ideas and so forth. And we want to see you succeed. We want to see you be able to come back proudly and say, we've made tremendous improvement. But I would expect that it's going to require some difficult decisions between now and then.
And frankly, a lot of difficult decisions that have already been made, kind of representative of a brand new team being onboarded and making a shift in the structure of the ASD, but certainly understand and willing to make the hard decisions that will be needed to be where we as a achievement school district, we as a department want to be. And that is, as I said, to be an exemplar for Tennessee, but also nationally. And I will say the team has appreciated Ally's feedback and the process. And this team inherited a lot of things that they are now working on. And to have kind of, let's put all the cards on the table and move forward, that is where we are. And again, looking forward to reporting back and talking more about the progress that we are making.
Just a quick point of clarification about the inheritance of the problems. Who was leading the team at the time that those problems were permitted or originated?
Do you mean the ASD?
Yes.
Lisa Settle was the most recent superintendent, but even before that, there were a couple of shifts in leadership over the last 5 years, and so that's part of the issue is the inconsistency in leadership.
So the interim leadership that's in place now, that's been part of the recent changes?
Yes, Robin Kopp led the turnaround efforts that were not ASD previously.
Got it.
All the district-led interventions or department partnerships.
So she also inherited the current problems that you guys
Correct.
are grappling with? Okay,
Yes.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yes,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Jensen.
With the ASDs, isn't there an exit plan underway? And how does that fit in this? Are we we're talking about them being charters, but the goal is for folks to exit. Is that correct or incorrect?
Yes, sir, that is correct. The ASD is an intervention. It is the
Right.
state's most intensive intervention. All of the schools that we will bring into the ASD going forward, and in fact, all of the schools that are currently in the ASD are charter schools. Our job is to move student achievement for the kids in seats so that when they either come off of the priority list and are no longer identified as one of the meet the exit criteria, they're no longer in the lowest performing 5%. But also, as a school gets closer to that 10 years in which they are in the ASD, the ultimate goal would be for those schools to be at a level where they could either be approved by their home LEA or by the commission in the instance where they meet those, when they've met that exit criteria. So there is an exit pathway for them. It involves a transition plan to ensure that we're keeping kids at the center of it, and we're thinking about where kids are going next, whether that's back to a school and a charter, the charter gets authorized. But if that's not the case, then we want to know and ensure that kids are moving into a better situation than making sure that they're not getting moved to a school that isn't going to serve them well.
So theoretically, they could move back into the public LEA.
Potentially, yes.
Right.
And that can be either if that charter that's sitting in the achievement school district today is making application to their home district and they get approved, that entire school would transition and be authorized by, say, Shelby County or Metro Nashville.
So one of my concerns that Mr. Molinar's raised is that how do you get a good board on an ASD that is moving, in other words, to address the deficiencies? If you've got a charter school that's got a board, how does that board, how do you maintain a good board? And you don't need, this is a more rhetorical question than it is needing an answer. How do we assure that transition has leadership, not just at the administration level, but at the board level to make that transition? And I'm just curious about how much of that scoring might be because of the weakness of the leadership, not necessarily in the school, but if we know we're moving out, how does that work?
So a couple of things, and I want to make sure I answer your question. So the ASD as an entity reports to the Department of Education and ultimately to the commissioner. So unlike a traditional LEA that has a school board, the ASD is part of our organizational structure. So it reports up. On the transition component of it, when I noted that there was a transition plan that must be developed, that is developed. It has representation from the home LEA, the ASD, district personnel, school personnel, and parents of those entities, so that we are engaging and making a plan, not in isolation that we hope they get it right, but really work to facilitate a strong transition plan, because that is where we want to ensure that all of those pieces get worked out, everything from where students will be zoned, how they will go to school, how their data will be transmitted securely back to the home LEA, the communication plan with families, the engagement of teachers, and how do we just make this as seamless as possible for students. And so that is kind of the transition happens with this group and this committee that meets multiple times for every individual school that's transitioning.
And correct me if I'm wrong, this is supposed to be completed by 24-25, is that, or has that been changed?
So schools enter the ASD and have entered the ASD at different times.
Mm-hmm.
It started, back in 2011 with, 6 schools. It over time grew, I think, primarily up to 31 schools at its peak.
Mm-hmm.
We now have 16 schools remaining in the ASD. Every school agreement charter that we authorize is a 10-year period of time. So those dates, the dates by which they must exit, is contingent upon when they enter the ASD.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments, Mr. Holt?
Madam Chair.
Can I add on one, Mr. Jensen? So in terms of the evaluation process that we are voting on today, the processes that Dr. Carney was just describing are relatively new and were not actually assessed in this evaluation. In 2 years from now, when we are reevaluating them, these processes will be assessed, but they were not part of this evaluation itself.
That's an important distinction. Mr. Holt?
So Dr. Carney, just wanted to thank you for coming before us today and talking about the plan for the ASD moving forward, and your goals and the competitiveness to try to be exemplary in the next evaluation. I was very glad to hear that. One of the other authorizers that was evaluated in this cycle was Metro Nashville Schools. We talked about their evaluation some at the workshop yesterday, and I just wanted to share a comment that I'm although no one from Metro is here today, I'm hopeful and optimistic that they share that same level of competitiveness because their evaluation score was only slightly above where the ASD was, and so wanted to note that I'm optimistic that Metro Nashville Schools also, has the same sort of desire to achieve at that highest level as an authorizer. So, thank you.
Thank you, and appreciate the support from ALLY, this organization, as well as the Charter Commission. Look forward to what comes next.
Dr. Carney, I also want to thank you, especially for your leadership. I know that this is difficult work, it's complicated, and this is the lowest performing school, so thank you again for your leadership and for being here and standing here and sharing these updates.
Thank you.
I would agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
I heard Mr. Jensen on my left, and
Second.
Mr. Jensen provides the motion and Mr. Mullenhour provides the second. I think I said that right, or did I? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you very much for your great work. Moving into item 4M, accountability system revisions, Dr. David Layer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm David Laird, Assistant Commissioner for Assessment and Accountability, and I'm here to present on final read an item related to the Tennessee Accountability System revisions. The Every Student Succeeds Act is a federal education grant program intended to establish and distribute federal funds to states to support a wide variety of educational programs. ESSA places requirements on state educational agencies, particularly in spaces related to assessment and accountability regarding these funds, and Tennessee receives more than $500 million each year as a result of its approved plan. The Tennessee Department of Education is undertaking an amendment to update its ESSA plan in response to monitoring findings received from the U.S. Department of Education. In the fall of 2022, the department conducted a series of engagement opportunities to review the proposed revisions. The department convened 8 in-person regional meetings with each superintendent study council. In addition, the department met with its state's advisory group in December and posted the revisions for public comment in in December and January. Pursuant to TCA 49-1602, the State Board of Education is required to establish appropriate performance goals and measures for schools and local education agencies. Moreover, TCA 49-1-619 requires the Commissioner of Education to obtain approval from the State Board for changes to the formula used to calculate school or LEA performance goals and measures. Pursuant to the above referenced statute, this item prevents revisions to the accountability or to the achievement indicator and the federally reported graduation rate, which impact performance goals and measures of LEAs and schools, which are components of Tennessee's amended ESSA plan. The department is requesting approval of the following revisions outlined or in additional documents provided to the board. The department has determined that there is no fiscal impact for LEAs as a result, and the department recommends approval of this item on final reading, and state board staff concurs with this recommendation. I'm happy to answer any additional questions about the accountability revisions.
I want to say, first of all, I know I thanked you yesterday, and I want to thank you again for the manner in which you presented this information to us. You had previously presented to us, and you did a very thorough and complete job, and you did it again yesterday. So, and I made the comment, and I want to say it again on the record, I think the commissioner hired the right person for the job. So thank you for your great work here. And yes.
If I may, I made a terrible omission yesterday. The accountability team at the department has reshuffled considerably, and we brought on a number of new additional staff members that have been instrumental in this work. So Dr. Shang-Yi Ho is our new Senior Director of Accountability. She's only been in the position a few months longer than I have. Both of us are about a year in. She's been absolutely instrumental in this work. Cassie King is our new TCAP coordinator. She has been answering all the questions from the field on this topic. And Andrew Marcy is essentially our single and sole accountability data analyst, and he has done all of the modeling work that we've been able to share with the field in this space. So I was remiss in not identifying the team effort that's been in the department. We're continuing to staff up, and I'm thrilled to continue to work in this space with a great team.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and I think it's important to acknowledge those individuals who are working diligently to support this work. And often the person who is the presenter gets the accolades, and sometimes not the accolades, and it's a tough position to be in. And I often like to tell everyone, it's not about you individually, it's about the board doing what they're expected to do. And I don't ever want anyone to take it personally, because it is tough work, it's very difficult work. So thank you again, and thank you for adding that. Are there comments or questions from anyone else? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Holt provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Eby provides the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item is the last one on the final read items. Item N, Educator Preparation Providers Specialty Area Programs. She's poised to present, Ms. Brooke Amos. Thank you.
Thank you all. Brooke Amos, Assistant Commissioner of Human Capital with the department. The recommendations in item N are related to 2 comprehensive review outcomes that occurred in the spring of 2022 and 2 EPP status change outcomes based on annual review progress monitoring since 2021. In relation to 2 comprehensive reviews, as brief context, there are 2 pathways for ongoing state approval for EPPs and specialty area programs. First, the National CAPE accreditation process facilitated through a CAPE state joint review, and second, the state managed process. Reviews occur every 7 years, and outcomes from these reviews are brought to our Advisory Committee on Educator Preparation, which is a committee of appointed LEA and EPP representatives who examine the accuracy and integrity across all comprehensive and specialty area program reviews. There are 5 review outcome statuses outlined in State Board rule, ranging from full approval exemplary status to denial of approval. The specific comprehensive review outcomes recommended today include 1 CAPE State Joint Review and 1 State Managed Review. Christian Brothers University's joint CAPE State Review team concluded that the EPP meets expectations on all CAPE standards. No critical deficiencies were cited. The provider is recommended for full approval with minor stipulations. After review of the elementary education K-5, English 612, English 6.8, Biology 612, Chemistry 612, Physics 612, Science 6.8, History 612, Social Studies 6.8, Instructional Leadership Pre-K 12, Special Education Interventionist K-8, and Special Education Interventionist 612 programs, the team concluded there were no deficiencies, and these programs are recommended for full approval. After review of the Early Childhood Education Pre-K 3, Mathematics 612, Mathematics 6.8, and Visual Arts K-12 and Reading Specialist Pre-K 12 programs, the team concluded there were minor deficiencies, and these programs are recommended for full approval with minor stipulations. The University of Memphis' state managed review team concluded that the EPP meets expectations on all CAPE standards. No critical deficiencies were cited. The provider is recommended for full approval with minor stipulations and full approval for all licensure programs. Once the outcomes are voted on, any EPPs that participated in a CAPE State Joint Review with the status of full approval with minor stipulations will engage in an annual reporting process facilitated by CAPE. EPPs that participated in a State Managed Review process with the status of full approval with minor stipulations will engage in an action planning process focused on any areas of deficiencies as outlined by the review. That process is facilitated by the department. As noted, we also have recommendations for 2 EPP status change outcomes based on an annual progress review monitoring from the department that has been ongoing since 2021. For brief context, Educator Preparation Rule 0520-02-04 states that for EPPs with full approval with minor stipulation status, the department may recommend to the state board removal of the minor stipulations for the remainder of the approval period if the EPP has adequately addressed the areas in need of improvement. To be eligible for the removal of the minor stipulations, the EPP must submit to the department a plan for addressing the areas of deficiency. The plan is then reviewed and approved by the department, and we do ongoing progress monitoring to see that the EPP is demonstrating progress made towards those action plan goals. For the 2 areas, EPPs that have been going through that process, the department staff have reviewed Tusculum University's action plan and subsequent evidence provided during the annual review progress monitoring. This department has concluded that the EPP meets expectations in the areas designated as needing improvement and recommends removal of the minor stipulations. The provider is recommended for a status change to full approval. The department staff have reviewed King University's action plan and subsequent evidence provided during annual progress monitoring reviews. The department has concluded that the EPP meets expectations in the areas designated as needing improvement and recommends removal of minor stipulations. The provider is recommended for a status change to full approval. The department recommends approval of this item on first and final reading, and SBE staff concurs with this recommendation. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Mullenhour.
I have a question directed, I think, at Angie Sanders on our team on this one, and I'm going to take just 1 minute to kind of briefly lay out the series of thoughts here. The first thought is it oftentimes makes sense for the state to rely on third parties to help make decisions, whether it's or to perform actions like road building or maybe accreditation in different forms. There's lots of examples of how that can be done really well. I think there's also, it creates opportunity for when we cede that authority or when we cede that responsibility and we let just a private organization deliberate about how to go about conducting their affairs. Sometimes they take more liberty than they should. And unless we're watching for that, we can find ourselves essentially blessing policies or blessing procedures or blessing methodologies that we wouldn't agree with. In this particular case, I realize that what we're voting on today is pretty straightforward, and we're working within the confines of the law as written and the rules as written. So that's why I'm directing this question at Angie. One of the concerns I have in just immediately in looking at this material is Cape Standard 1, which talks about making sure that the candidates, so our teachers, receive training about the reflection of their personal biases to increase their understanding and practice of equity, diversity, and inclusion. In my mind, the goal is to serve all kids, 100% of the kids, not 99.999%, it's 100% of the kids. And I think everybody in this room would agree with that. These are code words that can mean a lot of different things and that can oftentimes indicate an agenda that may not be helpful and that may be subvertive of some of the goals that we have here today. So my question to Angie is this. I know there's a bill that's currently in circulation that would essentially say, we, the state board, the department, and others, you cannot require teachers to undergo this kind of training. If that bill were to pass, Angie, what does that mean for Cape Standard 1 specifically? Where does that leave us as a board, as a department?
Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the board. I would need to review that bill again closer, but having reviewed it previously, we would have to examine whether or not this Cape Standard would put the state in violation of that law if it were to pass. And so we would have to have some additional conversations, not only internally, but with staff at the department about what effect that might have on the state's use of CAPE.
Okay, so I'll just flag that for consideration of the legislators and maybe even for consideration by CAPE as an organization. This is Senate Bill 0102 by Gardenhire and House Bill 0158 by Zachary that are currently under consideration by our legislature. Again, the goal is to serve all of these kids 100% of the time. And again, I think we're all in agreement in that sense, but we do have to keep our eyes open for when we, again, cede authority or cede responsibility to private organizations that sometimes take liberty in pushing other agendas or motives. So thank you for your time.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve this item? Mr. Jensen provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Darnell provides the second. Any further comments or questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Moving into Agenda Item 5, Department of Human Services Licensure Actions, Mr. Todd Madison and Ms. Candace Carter.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Todd Madison and Candace Carter, staff attorneys for the board. First up, we have the recommendations for licensure actions, Department of Human Services automatic actions. State law and board rule require the board to automatically suspend the license of an educator who fails to comply with an order for child support. The Department of Human Services has notified board staff that these individuals have fallen out of compliance with their court-ordered obligations. As such, our recommendation is to suspend these licenses until we receive notification that these individuals have come back into compliance. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
Move for approval.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second? Mr.
Second.
Morrow? Mr. Morrow. This requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells. Madam Chairman.
Aye. Excuse me. I'm losing my voice. Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you. Moving to your next item, automatic teacher licensure actions.
Yes, so next up we have the automatic revocation items. State law board rule require the automatic revocation or automatic permanent revocation of an educator's license for certain criminal offenses and classifications set forth in law. These individuals have either been convicted of one of the specified criminal offenses or their conduct meets the classification as determined by DCS. As such, we recommend the approval of these automatic actions. Happy to take questions on these items.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Mr. Mullenhour provides the motion. Is there a second? Was it you? I'm looking at you. Second?
Second.
Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Any questions or comments? This requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen. Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells. Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. I think I've been talking too much, maybe. Thank you very much. You have the next item.
Yes, ma'am.
Teacher-
Next up, we have the recommendations for licensure actions that are not tied to an automatic requirement. I noted for y'all yesterday that we had a possibility of an individual speaking today. He is elected not to speak. That was item I. As such, he can be considered collectively with the others for voting purposes. That is, unless you have items you would like to pull for further discussion, which we can do at this time.
Are there any items that need to be pulled? Since we're not hearing any, that we will then vote on all of these items together, items A through L together. Is there a motion to approve these items? Mr.
Second.
Cobbins provides the motion.
Second.
Mr. Mullenhour provides the second. This requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen. Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells. Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you very much for your great work. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving into the next agenda item, item 8, Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement, Teasa Rule, Recommendations, Chapter 0520-1205. Sorry. Mr. Buffalino, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it's all right with you, Madam, I would like to give the overview for both items together, if that's all right.
You can, and we'll vote on each one individually, and what we're doing is giving a positive, neutral, or negative recommendation on the revisions that are before us for both of these, but individually, so you can do that, certainly.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In 2022, during the legislative session, Governor Lee and the General Assembly passed the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act, or Teasa. That is Public Chapter 966 of the 2022 Public Acts. That piece of legislation will transition the state to a student-based funding formula beginning in the upcoming 2023-24 school year. The Teasa Act specifically requires rulemaking by the Department of Education in certain areas to define important terms and establish processes and procedures for funding disbursements. Teasa requires the department to submit these rules to the State Board of Education for a positive, neutral, or negative recommendation and include the board's recommendation in the filing of the rules with the Secretary of State's office. Obviously, we went through this full process with the full 14 rule sections back in August, and as we discussed yesterday in the workshop meeting, we are bringing some revisions to 2 of those rule sections, the outcome bonuses and a couple of changes to the definition section flowing from those changes in outcomes. So the revisions to the following sections of the rule are as follows. Chapter definitions 520-12-05-.02. The definitions rule outlines the term definitions used throughout the rules. The specific revisions to this rule add a definition of early post-secondary opportunity and EPSO credit for the purposes of awarding outcome bonuses for high school students. Then there are revisions to the outcome bonuses rule 520-12-05-.06. This outcomes bonus rules identifies the student performance goals that will generate additional funds for districts and public charter schools, including additional outcome weights awarded based on the performance of students in certain subgroups. Outcome weights include goals for elementary and middle school academic performance, post-secondary readiness, and academic performance for students with disabilities. Pursuant to TCA 49-3-106, the department convened the Teasa Outcomes Review Committee multiple times to hear feedback on the outcomes bonus criteria, and we did so once again on December 11th, I believe it was December 15th, to hear feedback on the outcome bonuses criteria for high school students. Based on the committee's feedback, the department is proposing revisions to the rule that allows a high school student who meets the following criteria to generate an outcome bonus. First, earned an EPSO credit in at least 2 early post-secondary opportunities, or EPSOs, and either scored a composite score of 21 or higher on the ACT, or increased his or her composite ACT score by at least 4 points between the 11th grade ACT and a subsequent ACT. Or, second, earned EPSO credits for 3 EPSOs. Or, finally, scored 31 or higher on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery or Armed Forces Qualifying Test and earned EPSO credit in at least 2 EPSOs. Revisions to the outcome bonuses rule also amend the criteria for students with disabilities and specify that the department shall conduct a pilot program in the 2023-24 school year related to post-high school success metrics in order to inform potential future revisions to the rule. The department will hold a rulemaking hearing to collect public feedback on these changes, and following this hearing, if there are substantive edits made to the rules, as a result of that public feedback, we will be required to bring these rules back to the State Board of Education for a subsequent recommendation. But we bring them to you here today for that recommendation. But I just want to be clear with that assurance that if there were changes, we would bring them back to the board. And with that, we would ask for a positive recommendation on these revisions.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions on, let's go with the first one first, which is the outcomes definition, the definitions, period. Sorry about that.
I had a question with respect to the
Yes,
outcomes,
yes,
so I'll wait.
please.
Okay, my question is
Go
actually
ahead.
directed at you, Madam Chair. My understanding is that you were part of the committee that reviewed these.
Yes, I was.
Okay, I
The
just wanted to.
the chairman of the board serves on that committee.
Got it, okay. So you were integral in these various edits that have been made.
I was involved in the meetings. The very last meeting, I had some technical difficulties with my computer, but I did dial into that call. I had the opportunity to say whatever I needed to say, and I certainly was keen on hearing what the superintendents and the educators and the other community representatives were also sharing. So yes, I was participating.
And presumably you're satisfied and delighted with where we've landed?
I am, but it's not for me alone to say. I represent this board, but I'm one person. So we need to have your eyes and ears on all of those things. So
Thank you.
I would never take away from your opportunity to vote, or recommend a change. Any questions or comments about chapter definitions rule? Because we will vote on that one separately from the outcome bonuses rules. Yes,
I do
Mr.
have a
Jensen.
process question. It's my understanding the legislature is considering some modifications. What happens in that process?
I would look to, go ahead, Mr. Buffalino.
Will we see it? I know we'll see it, but when would we see it? And-
So can I ask a clarifying question? Do you mean if the legislature is going to propose changes to the law?
Yeah, that they take it and say, okay, we want to do this or modify that or whatever. What is the process for it to come back to us for a review, up, down, or neutral?
Thank you for the question. It would depend on the nature of those changes, right? It would depend on if they required us to change something in the rules. Depending on the specific proposal, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but let's assume that it would. In that instance, we would work as quickly as possible upon that change becoming law to bring together any of those changes. And I think from the board's perspective, the process would look pretty similar to the process today. Here are the revisions we're proposing. We would bring them to you for a positive, neutral, negative recommendation. There'd have to be a public rulemaking hearing, and then they would have to go back to the Joint Government Operations Committee for their review and approval as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Holt?
Yes, I would just note for the record that for anyone who wasn't watching yesterday, that we had a robust discussion about both the definitions and the outcome bonus revisions to the rule yesterday. And so that's why I don't personally have any questions today.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to take item A first, the chapter definitions. Is there a motion for a positive, neutral, or negative recommendation?
Madam Chair, Jordan Mullenhour, I make a motion for a positive recommendation.
We have a motion for a positive recommendation. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Holt provides a second. I should have said that Mr. Mullenhour provides the motion. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved for item A. Moving to outcomes bonuses rule, is there a motion for a positive, neutral, or negative recommendation?
Were we done with the discussion on that one, or did I miss? I had one question.
Okay, let's back up a minute.
And this is kind of picky, but if you read 4A and 4B, it gives the definition. First it says, a student who scores, meets expectation or exceeds expectations on third grade ELA, TCAP, or any student who scored approaching, but demonstrated significant growth on fourth grade, generates an outcome bonus of 10% of the base funding level. If the student is economically disadvantaged, an English learner, or a student with disability, that student instead generates an outcome bonus of 20%. Now, I know the intent is they would have to meet the requirements to generate that bonus. But if you read that legally, the way I read it, all they have to do is be economically disadvantaged or an English learner or student, and they generate an outcome bonus of 20%. So I think proper thing would be to say, if the student is economically disadvantaged, an English learner, or a student with a disability, and meets the requirements for an outcome bonus, that student then generates 20%. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'd note this actually is a portion that we're not changing here today. That's in the original rule that's sort of up. I think from a technical perspective, and I might defer to Angie here, I do think we're still covered with the current language because it says if the student, after it's already sort of defined the criteria for the student first. But I don't disagree that that clarity could help. So we could talk about whether we sort of think that's needed for our attorneys and possibly make that change.
Other comments? So we already have a motion for a positive recommendation. Let me just do the determination by voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So the ayes have it and the motion is approved. We'll move to item B.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Item B, we didn't do item B yet. Outcomes bonus rule.
What did we just do?
What? We're going to vote on the next one because we're doing them separately.
Apologies.
No, that's okay.
I thought we
There's
just
a lot
did it.
going on.
I thought we just did it.
We did both together. I was trying to
No.
do
No,
separately. I did both?
Yeah.
Okay.
We need a
It
motion.
is time for me to retire.
You need a motion, though, in a second.
Can't do that.
So I'm asking for a motion then on the second one, because now you'll have me confused, or I have myself confused,
I move that we adopt this one.
which is the outcome bonuses rule.
The outcome
Okay.
bonuses, yes.
The outcomes bonuses. So we have a motion by Mr. Morrow. Do we have?
Oh, yes, sorry. I move a positive recommendation
Oh,
on the
yes,
outcome
thank you.
bonuses.
We have a positive recommendation from Mr. Morrow. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Holt provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Great work. Okay. Can I handle this next section? We're moving into the election of board officers. Section 2 of our board meetings policy outlines that the most senior member of the board, as determined by years of service, will preside over the election of officers, and that happens to be me. And I have made it clear, I want to be certain that everybody understands this, I've made it clear that I am not seeking appointment again as chair of this board. So as that senior member, I'm going to preside over the election of officers. And I'm going to start out by reading our policy on this subject matter. Our board meetings policy 1.200, section 5, related to method and election of officer, states the chair and vice chair of the board shall be elected by the members of the board by a term of 2 years. I'm going to open the floor for nominations for the chair, and I'm going to jump ahead of everybody else, and I'm going to nominate Mr. Bob Eby to be the chairman of the State Board of Education. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, I would respectfully concur with that. Mr. Eby is a steady hand. He has been a mentor to me for my almost 5 years on this board, which I appreciate greatly. And I think as my time comes to an end shortly, the board will be in good hands with Mr. Eby as chair.
I do have to ask if there are other nominations. Does anyone want to make another nomination? I'm required to say that 3 times. So there's no misunderstanding by the instructions of Mr. Nathan James. Is there another nomination? Does anyone wish to make another nomination? No one wants to make a nomination, so it sounds like you might be the default. You have no competition. All in favor? I don't think we have to do roll call, do we? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We now officially have a new chairman of the board, and I will give Mr. Chairman, I will give him a moment to speak, but first, there's a few things that I want to say because I wanted to hurry up and jump in and get this, I wanted to get him elected. So I do want to say that you've been serving since 2019. 18. Okay. 2018, and after serving for 1 year, he became the vice chairman of the board. He has been an exemplary vice chairman of the board. It's been my intention all along to prepare him, because I think that's what should happen. The vice chair should be in preparation to become the chairman, barring any unforeseen circumstances. And so I've made it my mission to make sure that he was prepared. But he's jumped in. You all know this. That's never been something to debate. He has jumped in full force. And I really honestly believe that he was born to be the chairman of the State Board of Education. Does anybody dispute me? I think he's the first person I've ever known who wanted to be in this position. I served and I loved every minute of serving, and I will say something about that later. And so it's not a light decision on my part, but this is the right time for me to step down, the right time for him to become chairman. Okay, so now moving on to...
Can I say something?
Oh, yes. I stole your thunder. No, I didn't. Thank you, please.
Well, first, I'm honored by the confidence that this board has placed in me for this position. I thank Chair Hartgrove, serving under her for the last 4 years and her as chairman for the last 5 years. She has certainly been a model, I think, for all of us during a time of a lot of change. There was COVID, there's Teasa, there's everything else. And her focus has always been on the student. And that's a model for me to emulate that I hope I can in the future. And I look forward to continuing to work with this outstanding board and with the outstanding state board staff that we have, with the Department of Education, with the legislators, with the districts, and all the constituents to continue to move forward our mission, and that is to prepare our students for success, post-secondary success after graduation. And I will be available to listen to anybody else that has that same goal in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations. And later on, I'll officially pass the gavel to you. Now we're going to move into nominations for the office of Vice Chairman of the Board. I am now asking if there is anyone wishing to make a nomination for the Vice Chairman.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Jensen.
I'd like to place the name of my friend and business competitor and fellow Memphian, Daryl Cobbins, to serve. I think he joined this board in 2017 and has been, in my mind, a real exemplary member, and it's with a great deal of confidence and pleasure that I recommend he be considered as vice chairman.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Mr. Morrow provides the second. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations?
One more time.
Are there any other nominations? All in favor of Mr. Daryl Cobbins becoming the vice chairman of the board, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations on becoming vice chairman of the board. Well done. Well done.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Mollenauer.
And just reading the tea leaves here a little bit, I want to make sure that I'm not stepping on anybody else's toes. So I'm just going to reference this new policy that we put in place today. It allows for a chair emeritus. I'm assuming, Bob, that that's your thunder.
I was going to move.
All right. Then I'm just going to pause and hand it off to you.
Good night. What are we doing?
Do I have the gavel now? Do I have the gavel now?
Oh, yes. He is now officially the chairman of the board. He's trying to take it from me. We have a sibling rivalry.
She's my sister from another mister, I think.
I said my brother from another mother. I
No,
officially pass the gavel to you, and you are now officially the chairman of the board.
And in my first action, because we did just recently pass this policy that allows a chair emeritus, I can't think of a better person to be the first chair emeritus and to be the chair emeritus than Lillian Hartgrove. And so I will so move that. Do I have a second? Do I have to ask that 3 times or
You
not?
do. Maybe, I don't know, ask Mr. James, maybe.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Madam Chair Emeritus, would you like to say a few words?
I do want to say a few words, and I will try not to take very long because I know that this has been a very busy agenda. I do want to say that it has been truly an honor for me to serve as the chairman of the state board. It's not a position you take lightly. It definitely requires someone who's going to do, as Mr. Eby has described, and I have confidence that he's going to do that. But it's all about the children, and he said that, and we all believe that. But it does take dedication and commitment to serve in this capacity, and I did this with my heart and my passion, and so I do not give it up lightly. But my term on the board, my second 5-year term, ends March 31st of next year. So that's why I'm the emeritus, I guess. I have 1 more year to serve, and I will serve with as much gusto as I have and much passion. And I've been thankful for this opportunity. To serve the students of our state, our great state of Tennessee, has definitely been an honor of my lifetime. And I hope you all feel the same way about your service, because I would have felt that way serving as a board member for the entire length of my service. So I'm very appreciative of the honor you have bestowed on me. So thank you so much.
And I think we should give her a standing ovation.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Before we adjourn this meeting, are there any
Yes.
closing remarks?
Yes. We did not give our vice chair an
Oh,
opportunity
I'm
to
so
say a
sorry,
few
Vice
words too.
Chairman.
So Darryl, would you like?
My humble apologies.
No problem at all. Well, thank you, Larry, for the rousing nomination. I think you still owe me some money from when I worked for you 20 years ago, but thank you to fellow board members for the opportunity to serve in a leadership capacity. You know, a lot of the thrust behind me accepting appointment to this board back in 2017 had to do with my son who's special needs. And not that I have a shortage of things to do back in Memphis, but I felt like I could serve here and be a voice for parents of children with special needs, and certainly be an advocate for our policies and things that we implement that make sure that those children remain at the forefront. So I'll continue in that same vein along with everything else we have to do, but definitely appreciate the trust and confidence of this body. So thank you very much.
Congratulations, and I'm thrilled. I know I'm not the chairman anymore, but Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment?
Yes,
I have to get used to that. I'll behave, I promise. Anyway, I do want to congratulate you. You have been a phenomenal board member, and I am thrilled that you have accepted this opportunity. And I know you'll serve exceedingly well. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Are there any other comments before we adjourn? If none, do I have to say something specifically, or I just say we're adjourned?
See how I was trying to do that for you? It just got sweet.
It's like muscle memory.
I know, I have to.